If I were to wrestle him now, we'd have to have a dustpan under the ring to sweep him.
Triple H has never been a big fan of Hulk Hogan, and now he is finally exposing why so many wrestlers could not stand him, from Bret Hart to Vince McMahon. But what Triple H just revealed is even worse than Hogan's racist scandals and union-busting reputation. The ultimate betrayal is no secret anymore, because Hogan was never known for loyalty, and one of his biggest betrayals left Vince McMahon and Triple H furious. In 1994, during the chaos of the steroid trial, Hogan left WWE, but instead of fading away, he shocked everyone by signing with WCW, the biggest rival of WWE. This was not just a business choice, it felt like personal war, and McMahon felt deeply betrayed, because he had built Hogan into the biggest star, only to see his golden boy working for the competition. In the Netflix documentary Mr. McMahon, Vince admitted how much this broke him, saying he took Hogan and made him a superstar, only for Hogan to turn to their rivals. From a business point of view, Hogan's decision was smart, but from a personal side, it was toxic. And the impact grew even bigger in 1996, when Hogan pulled off one of the most shocking heel turns in wrestling at Bash at the Beach, where he revealed himself as the mysterious Third Man, joining Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to form the New World Order. This moment was revolutionary for wrestling history, but it also revealed a darker side of Hogan's character. Finally, Hogan was able to show his true self, the manipulative and self-serving politician that many of his peers had dealt with for years, and as Hollywood Hulk Hogan, he no longer had to pretend to be the all-American hero. This version of Hogan was undeniably captivating television, and the New World Order helped WCW dominate the ratings for 83 straight weeks, almost driving WWE into bankruptcy, but behind the scenes, his behavior was said to be even more troubling. For example, Billy Kidman, a talented high flyer trying to make a name in WCW, was reportedly buried by Hogan, who mocked him publicly by saying Kidman could not even draw flies at a flea market. Eric Bischoff later confirmed that Hogan looked down on younger talent, using his creative control to hold them back while protecting his own position. This became a repeated pattern with Hogan, where instead of using his power to build the next generation, he allegedly used it to keep himself on top, no matter what was best for the business or his fellow wrestlers. And yet the most shocking betrayal was still to come. Fast forward to 2002, when Hogan returned to WWE after Vince McMahon had bought WCW and while he came back as a heel. The reaction at WrestleMania X8 against The Rock was so loud and positive that WWE had no choice but to turn him face again, which set up one of the most controversial championship reigns ever. The drama began with Hogan's feud against Triple H in 2002. As Triple H had just returned from an 8-month injury and won the undisputed title at WrestleMania, only to lose it to Hogan at Backlash a month later. This was never part of a long-term plan, but rather a last-minute call made on the very day of the event, fueled by Hogan's sudden popularity. Now imagine being Triple H in that moment, after working hard to come back from a career-threatening injury, headlining WrestleMania as champion, only to be told just hours before the pay-per-view that you were dropping the belt to a part-timer in his late 40s. In his 2004 autobiography, Making the Game, Triple H admitted his frustration, saying he was already a proven ratings draw, and that losing the title so quickly destroyed his momentum. And what made the situation even more fascinating is that years later, when asked about the idea of facing an older Hogan in a fantasy match, Triple H gave a response that was absolutely savage.
He's pretty old now. He's in his mid to late 70s, isn't he?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
If I were to wrestle him now, we'd have to have a dustpan under the ring to sweep him up and take him back.
That remark from Triple H summed up the dismissive attitude many wrestlers had developed toward Hogan over the years. And the fact that he would make such a cutting joke about needing a dustpan to sweep up Hogan showed just how little respect remained for the aging star. Within the wrestling world, this was seen as classic Hogan politics, where he used his fame and backstage influence to force himself into the main event picture, even when it hurt the company or the wrestlers around him. But this is where the story takes a shocking turn, because beyond the politics, we begin to see the racist behavior that would completely destroy Hogan's reputation. While Hogan was presenting himself as a beloved returning hero, he was privately showing a darker side of his character. And the truth came crashing down in 2015 when a sex tape from 2007 was leaked, exposing Hogan repeatedly using racial slurs and making offensive remarks about his daughter's dating life. He used the N-word multiple times, and even admitted on tape that he was racist to a point, making it clear this was not a slip of the tongue but a mindset he carried. The fallout was immediate, as WWE fired him, erased him from programming, and even removed him from the Hall of Fame, showing just how damaging this revelation truly was. The man who once preached about believing in yourself and treating everyone equally was now exposed as someone holding deeply prejudiced views, and the wrestling community's reaction was quick and unforgiving. CM Punk, who had already criticized Hogan's politics and ego, became even louder about his hatred after the racist revelations, while MVP openly called Hogan a racist in interviews, saying flat out that his own words proved it. What made this even harder for wrestlers of color was the fact that they had to work with him, shake his hand, take his advice, and show him respect, all while knowing how he truly felt about them behind the scenes, which turned the betrayal into something personal as well as professional. Scott Steiner, who had shared locker rooms with Hogan in WCW, also tore into him, calling him a piece of garbage and accusing him of using his political power to bury younger talent while hiding racist attitudes. The most damaging part of this scandal was how it forced fans and wrestlers alike to look back at Hogan's entire career through a different lens, making people question his actions and motives in a way they never had before. Suddenly, Hogan's history of refusing to put over black wrestlers, his constant backstage politics, and his selective mentoring started to look much darker in light of his exposed racism, and Mark Henry's account highlights this perfectly. After the scandal broke, Henry revealed that WWE had suggested Hogan visit black schools to apologize, but he refused to support the idea because he felt Hogan showed no real remorse for what he had said. This showed just how deep the damage ran, as even attempts at reconciliation were seen as hollow and self-serving. The scandal also exposed Hogan's long-standing habit of lying and exaggerating, even in the most serious situations, as his initial apology focused more on being secretly recorded than on the hateful words he used, proving he failed to understand why his comments were so harmful. At the same time, Hogan's personal life was crumbling in the public eye, as his bitter divorce from Linda Hogan between 2007 and 2009 was filled with accusations of cheating, including rumors that he had an affair with his daughter, Brooke's best friend. Linda accused Hogan of being a sex addict and abusive, while their VH1 reality show Hogan Knows Best put family tensions on full display, tensions that only grew worse after the divorce. The chaos deepened in 2007 when his son Nick, then just 17, was involved in a serious car crash while racing, leaving passenger John Graziano with permanent brain damage that required lifelong care. Nick served 8 months in jail, and leaked phone calls from that time exposed Hogan, making cold remarks about the accident being God's will. Yet perhaps the most revealing part of Hogan's character during this turbulent period was not his family struggles, but his obsession with money and reputation. While presenting himself as a broken family man, Hogan was also locked in a massive lawsuit against Gawker over the leaked sex tape that had exposed his racist comments. With financial backing from billionaire Peter Thiel, Hogan secured a $140 million judgment that bankrupted the media site, a case hailed as a win for privacy rights, but also seen as proof of Hogan's willingness to use extreme legal power to protect an image built on lies and hypocrisy. In the end, Hogan walked away with roughly $31 million after settlements, but no amount of money could repair the damage to his reputation within the wrestling world. For wrestlers who had endured Hogan's backstage politics for decades, the scandals of the 2000s only confirmed what many had long suspected, that his public image was completely opposite of his private character. This period is significant because it shows the buildup of Hogan's behavior over the years, the union betrayal of the 1980s, the constant backstage politics of the 1990s, and the racist revelations of the 2000s all formed a clear picture of a man who always put his own interests above everyone else, no matter the damage caused. This is why Triple H's recent comments carry so much weight. Because as someone who worked with Hogan directly and saw his behavior up close, his words about why wrestlers despise Hogan hit harder than simple creative disagreements. They exposed deep character flaws that affected the entire industry. But to understand how Hogan built this reputation, we have to go back to the 1980s and early 1990s, which in many ways were just the warm-up to the chaos that followed. Wrestling's most hated man did not earn that title overnight. So let's set the stage. It's the 1980s. Wrestling is about to explode into mainstream pop culture, and at the center of it all stands a blonde, mustached giant who would soon become the face of sports entertainment. Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea quickly became the biggest name in wrestling, but while millions of fans were chanting, "What you gonna do, brother?" and flexing their 24-inch pythons, behind the scenes Hogan was allegedly making moves that would put even the most ruthless corporate executives to shame. His wrestling career began in 1977 under the guidance of legendary Japanese trainer Hiro Matsuda, yet his path to the top was filled with questionable choices. When he first joined the WWF in 1979 under Vince McMahon Sr., Hogan was fired in 1981 for taking a role in Rocky III without getting permission. But everything changed when Vince McMahon Jr. bought the company from his father in 1982. Vince saw dollar signs in Hogan and brought him back in December 1983, setting the stage for history. On January 23, 1984, Hogan defeated the Iron Sheik at Madison Square Garden to win his first WWF World Heavyweight Championship. And that moment launched the era of Hulkamania. This was far more than a wrestling match. It was the birth of a phenomenon that would take the sport into mainstream culture. This was the birth of a cultural phenomenon that would change entertainment forever. But here's the wild part. While Hogan was being celebrated as a larger-than-life hero who preached training, prayers, and vitamins, he was also engaging in behavior that would eventually destroy his reputation with his peers. These actions were so controversial that even decades later, wrestlers are still calling him out. The first major red flag came with the infamous union situation. Imagine the scene. It's 1986, just before WrestleMania 2, and Jesse "The Body" Ventura is attempting something revolutionary, organizing wrestlers into a union. The goal was simple but powerful: basic workers' rights, health benefits, fair pay, and protection from injuries. At the time, wrestlers were classified as independent contractors with no insurance, yet they were expected to put their bodies on the line night after night. And Ventura believed it was time to change that. This was the moment where Hogan allegedly revealed his true colors, because instead of standing with his fellow wrestlers, he reportedly told Vince McMahon about the union plans, which led to threats of firings and killed the movement before it could even start. Jesse Ventura later exposed this bombshell, saying it was Hogan who ratted him out, which cost Ventura his job and left him furious at a man he once considered a friend. Imagine trying to fight for better conditions for everyone in the locker room, only to be betrayed by the biggest star in the company just to protect his own spot. Ventura has since labeled Hogan a backstabber and narcissist in countless interviews, and honestly, it's hard to blame him. What makes this worse is that during a 1991 lawsuit, Vince McMahon himself testified that Hogan had tipped him off about the union talk, and Ventura ended up winning over $81,000 in royalties. So this wasn't just locker room gossip, it was confirmed in court. The ripple effect of that betrayal is massive, because wrestling still has no union to this day, and wrestlers continue to suffer injuries without proper protection. A problem that can be traced back to the moment Hogan allegedly chose his own interests over the well-being of the entire locker room. During Hogan's golden era from 1984 to 1993, he was practically untouchable, holding the WWF Championship for a record 1,174 days, headlining 8 of the first 9 WrestleManias, and drawing record-breaking crowds. His 1988 match against Andre the Giant on NBC's The Main Event attracted 33 million viewers, a US television record for wrestling that still stands today. But behind all that success, whispers were growing about Hogan's backstage politics, his creative control clauses, and his constant refusal to put other talent over. In fact, the very idea of politicking in wrestling is often tied directly to Hogan, who was seen as its master. Take Bret Hart, for example, one of the most respected wrestlers of all time, a technical genius, and a man who commanded respect in every locker room he entered. But when it came to Hogan, Hart did not hold back, accusing him of using his influence to avoid dropping the WWE Championship in 1993, despite reported plans for Hart to get a real run with the title.
Do I like Hulk Hogan? No, I don't. I think he's a phony piece of shit.
That was Bret Hart, no filter and pure honesty, calling Hogan a 1 out of 3 wrestler who didn't know a headlock from a headlamp and accusing him of abusing his power. When a wrestler of Hart's reputation says something that blunt, it proves just how deep the resentment ran. But the Hart situation went even further at WrestleMania 9 in 1993, where there were reportedly plans for a proper finish to the show. Yet Hogan allegedly convinced Vince McMahon to change the ending. Instead of the planned conclusion, Hogan stepped in and defeated Yokozuna in a sudden impromptu match, stealing what should have been Hart's defining moment. Hart later called it a black eye on the event, and has never forgiven what he considers a betrayal. And the political maneuvering didn't stop in WWE, because when Hogan moved to WCW, his creative control became an even bigger problem, with the infamous Starrcade 1997 match against Sting serving as the perfect example. What should have been Sting's crowning moment at Starrcade 1997 was allegedly ruined because Hogan refused to lose cleanly, and this type of behavior is exactly what caused so many wrestlers to lose respect for the man behind the character. Even someone as respected as The Undertaker, a wrestler known for his professionalism and loyalty to the business, had his own issues with Hogan. The Undertaker accused him of exaggerating an injury from a tombstone pile driver in 1991, saying Hogan faked neck pain just to avoid losing cleanly, and this damaged their trust early in Taker's career. Coming from a figure as respected and reserved as The Undertaker, that accusation was a massive indictment of Hogan's character. But maybe the most damaging part of Hogan's legacy was the hypocrisy. Because while he was promoting the image of a clean living, all-American hero who told millions of kids to train hard, say their prayers, and eat their vitamins, he was allegedly living a life that completely contradicted that message. The steroid scandal is the perfect example of Hogan's hypocrisy. In the early 1990s, during Vince McMahon's federal trial for steroid distribution, Hogan appeared on the Arsenio Hall show and flat out denied abusing steroids, claiming he only used them briefly for injuries. McMahon even warned him beforehand, "Don't lie about it." But Hogan lied anyway. Then, in 1994, when prosecutors needed testimony, Hogan was granted immunity and admitted he had been using steroids since 1976, over 13 years. This completely contradicted his public statements and exposed him as someone willing to lie to protect his image, even if it meant throwing others under the bus. The pattern was undeniable. Time and time again, Hogan put his own interests above his friends, his colleagues, and the very business that made him rich and famous. And this goes beyond simple wrestling politics. It cuts to a fundamental lack of integrity that his peers saw clearly, even if the fans didn't. In Hulk Hogan's final years, leading up to his death on July 24th, 2025, Triple H's tribute revealed the complicated truth about wrestling's most controversial figure. But before reaching that emotional conclusion, it's important to look at something that showed just how deep Hogan's pattern of problematic behavior ran. His political alignments and the way they exposed his real character to a new generation of fans. Starting in the 2020s, Hogan became increasingly vocal in his support for Donald Trump, and this association brought out some of his most controversial moments. As he openly endorsed Trump, spoke at the 2024 Republican National Convention, and appeared at rallies where he joked about body-slamming Kamala Harris, making statements that many considered racist and misogynistic. This political alignment was more than personal belief. It reflected the same patterns of behavior wrestlers had been criticizing for decades. By the time Hogan appeared at WWE events in 2025, he was being booed by crowds who understood that his public persona had long been a carefully crafted lie. And the most telling incident of this era involved his Real American Beer Company in 2024. Hogan allegedly fired his black beer ambassador, Essie Janai, after learning about her race, replacing her with white influencers, and Janai shared proof on social media that sparked a massive backlash, showing that Hogan's racist behavior was not just from the past, but an ongoing problem affecting real people's lives. This also highlights the depth of resentment toward Hogan in the wrestling world, as countless respected wrestlers have publicly spoken about their issues with him, not just disgruntled employees, but Hall of Famers, main event stars, and industry legends. Bruno Sammartino, one of the most respected champions in wrestling history, openly criticized Hogan, saying he was never impressed with his in-ring ability and that while many believed Hogan was a great draw, in reality he really wasn't, which was a devastating assessment coming from someone of Sammartino's stature. Shawn Michaels, another legend, had his own explosive confrontation with Hogan's ego during their 2005 SummerSlam feud, as Hogan's refusal to lose cleanly forced Michaels to oversell moves in protest, further showing how Hogan's self-interest often came at the expense of others. Shawn Michaels revealed that Hogan had initially pitched their feud as good guy versus good guy, but later changed his mind and demanded a traditional heel versus babyface setup that heavily favored himself, showing his ego in action. But perhaps the most damning accounts came from wrestlers across different promotions who noticed the same patterns. In TNA Wrestling, AJ Styles expressed frustration that Hogan never promoted the company or mentioned TNA publicly, leaving Styles to believe Hogan was embarrassed to be associated with the promotion. Internationally, Hogan also ran into problems. During his time in Japan with New Japan Pro Wrestling, there were reports of cultural insensitivity and a refusal to adapt to different wrestling styles and traditions. This behavior impacted multiple generations of wrestlers. Older stars like Bruno Sammartino and Bob Backlund criticized him for turning wrestling from an athletic competition into pure entertainment, often relying on political maneuvering rather than skill, with Backlund specifically calling out Hogan's steroid use and saying he was a poor representation of the business and a bad role model for young wrestlers. Meanwhile, stars from the Attitude Era and later saw Hogan as someone unwilling to adapt or elevate younger talent, further cementing the perception of him as self-serving and difficult to work with. Before his tragic death, Chris Benoit described Hogan as extremely political based on his experience working with him in WCW, and modern wrestlers have been even more direct, with MJF openly calling Hogan a liar and a racist in interviews, representing a generation who grew up aware of Hogan's controversies and were not influenced by nostalgia for his 1980s hero image. Taken together, all these testimonies paint a consistent picture of someone who repeatedly prioritized his own interests over the wrestling business, his colleagues, and even basic human decency, showing that this was about far more than backstage politics or creative disagreements. It was a fundamental character flaw that affected everyone who worked with him. The story reaches its most emotional point with Hogan's death. On July 24th, 2025, Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea passed away at age 71 from cardiac arrest at his home in Florida, forcing the wrestling world to confront the complicated legacy of one of its biggest stars. Triple H, serving as WWE's chief content officer, faced the challenge of honoring a man whose behavior had caused problems for decades, and his response ended up revealing a lot about the true nature of Hogan's relationships within the wrestling industry.
So many of us were honored to call a friend. The truth is, he captivated millions of people and inspired them around the globe.
On July 25th, 2025, Triple H narrated an emotional WWE SmackDown video package calling Hogan the archetype of a superstar who inspired millions. And he shared a social media post stating that WWE would not be where it is today without Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea, whose impact loomed larger than almost anyone else in wrestling history. What makes Triple H's tribute fascinating is how carefully it was crafted to honor Hogan's influence while subtly acknowledging the controversies that surrounded him. Triple H has never publicly detailed the specific reasons why wrestlers disliked Hogan, but his measured response to Hogan's death spoke volumes about the complicated feelings within the wrestling community. Fan reactions were just as mixed. Social media was flooded with tributes from people who grew up watching Hulkamania, but it was also filled with criticism from those who could not separate the man from his actions, reflecting the complex and often conflicting legacy Hogan left behind. Posts on X, formerly Twitter, ranged from mourning the loss of a childhood hero to calling out Hogan's racist remarks and anti-union behavior, and one of the most revealing aspects of the discussion after his death was how it exposed generational divides in wrestling fandom. Older fans who remembered the 1980s boom tended to focus on Hogan's positive contributions, while younger fans, who grew up knowing about his controversies, were far less forgiving. Wrestling media coverage reflected this same complexity, with obituaries acknowledging both his enormous role in bringing wrestling into the mainstream and the scandals that damaged his reputation. Many articles specifically highlighted the union betrayal, racist comments, and backstage politics as key parts of his legacy, showing that Hogan's story is as complicated as it is iconic. Hogan's death forced the wrestling industry to confront some uncomfortable truths about its past, with the union issues in particular gaining renewed attention as current wrestlers continue to face many of the same problems Jesse Ventura tried to address in the 1980s. Vince McMahon, despite his own recent controversies and legal battles, posted a tribute acknowledging their complex and often contentious history, saying, "Despite our ups and downs, Hulk was a brother," a statement that perfectly captures the mix of success and complication, profit and problems in their relationship. The post-death discussion also highlighted the ongoing impact of Hogan's actions, as current wrestlers pointed out that the lack of a union in WWE, continuing issues with healthcare and working conditions, and persistent problems with diversity can all be traced back to decisions made during Hogan's era. Modern stars like Seth Rollins have been vocal about their feelings toward Hogan, showing that his influence, both positive and negative, still resonates in wrestling today. Seth Rollins publicly criticized Hogan's racism and said he disliked his style in interviews, representing a new generation of wrestlers willing to speak truth to power, even when that power belongs to a deceased legend. The international wrestling community also weighed in, with wrestlers and promotions from Japan, Mexico, and Europe sharing stories about Hogan's behavior during international tours, consistently portraying him as difficult to work with and disrespectful of other wrestling cultures. Looking at the full picture of Hulk Hogan's career and its aftermath, what emerges is a story of incredible success, built on a foundation of problematic behavior. Hogan undeniably changed wrestling forever, bringing it into the mainstream and creating a template for sports entertainment that still exists today, but that success came at a cost, not just to Hogan himself, but to countless wrestlers whose careers were affected by his actions. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out our other thrilling content by clicking on your screen.